Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Muslim Network TV is always there on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and of course on our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. And we'll be pretty soon on Apple TV as well. We are found on YouTube and Facebook. No justice, no peace is the slogan which is probably the loudest slogan today on the streets of America. While politicians are coming up with this solution and that solution about police reform, more police reform, or little police reform, or democratic reform, or the Republican reform, this movement did not begin with the tragic murder of George Floyd, and may not end by the conviction of the 4 former police officers in Minneapolis. Slavery is against human nature. Slaves have always resorted to rebellions in Americas, and that rebellion keeps changing its name. Sometimes it's Black Liberation Movement, sometimes it is Black Panthers, sometimes it is Nation of Islam, and sometimes it is the Islamic movement in America, and sometimes it is Black Lives Matter movement. Some are successful, many results in failure, but freedom movement continue to move forward. I visited ruins of a slave colony. It is called Maroon colonies in Trinidad. These were not slaves, but somehow it referred that way. They were free people, and their leader were Abu Bakr. And when in 1775, slave joined British against the American colonists, about 20,000 of them. And one of that band was led by Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr is the Muslim name named after a second caliph after Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he joined on the condition that they will be returned back to Africa if British win or lose. British lost, but British, they cheated them. They dumped them in the Caribbean, where slavery was still practiced, and they were looking for freedom. So Abu Bakr led his people and established a Maroon colony away from the city of Trinidad. And I had the honor of visiting that. A forest officer guided me, and there was a lot of muck. I was up to my knees in muck, and somebody has to rescue me. But we were able to do some excavation there and some. So Abu Bakr was engaged in correspondence with the British monarchy, and his letters are preserved in British Library. He was saying that this was the deal, British abandoned us, and now we are in this free, but there is a river and we cannot take our coffee to the city to sell. So could you please at least build a bridge? And that correspondence. So freedom struggle kept changing its character. And today's character is well known to us, but slogan remains: no peace, no justice, no peace. And this freedom struggle continues. And as a Muslim, and you watching Muslim Network TV, we are told by God Almighty in the Quran, which is the last revelation to humanity, what Muslims are required to believe in all the prophet and all the messages sent by God Almighty to humanity to guide them. God has told all human beings were created one. It is the people who divided themselves up. So God sent prophet after prophets to bring people together. And those prophets have universal teachings because they were from one God. And God says in the Quran that we sent all the prophets with clear guidance for one purpose. In Arabic, لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, so help people stand up for al-qist, Al-Qist, if you pick up the Arabic dictionary, it means justice, fairness, and equity. So it runs very deep in Muslim veins. And today, my guest is a person I have worked with. I have spoken at his mosque, at his masjid, as Muslims call it. This is where I met Daryl Hunt before I knew who Daryl Hunt is. But I have also witnessed many things with him. My guest is no other than my dear friend, Imam Khalid Griggs. Welcome to Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thanks so much for having me, Imam Mujahid.
Imam Khalid Fattah Griggs is the founding Imam of the Community Mosque in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He was a former member of the Board of Trustees of the Parliament of the World's Religions. Imam Griggs currently serves as the Vice President of ICNA's Social Justice and Civic Engagement Group. He is a board member of the Institute for Dismantling Racism, national and international lecturer, prison reform, and social justice activist. Khalid Griggs, in your bio, nowhere it says that you're a civil rights leader as well. Why did you skip that?
Well, I guess primarily I was just trying to come more present, be closer to the present time. I left out a lot of things there, and that was just one of them.
So you have, if I remember correctly, you have half Cherokee and half African American, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, there is a good part of Muslim history with you. You have been part of many organizations and many movements. And any plans of writing your autobiography?
You know, my daughters have been trying to get me to put pen to paper for the longest time now, and I promised that I would do something, if no more than just for my family, my daughters, my wife, and my grandkids. So inshallah, I do intend to put something down, and I need to do it soon, inshallah.
Well, instead of your wife, your children, your grandchildren, you can add us also, who can learn a great deal from it.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
Thank you. So what is the role of Islam and Muslim in the freedom movement of former slaves and Black liberation movement, and, starting right from the earlier days, because you are in Carolina. Were you born in Carolinas?
Yes, in Winston-Salem.
Wow. So that historic city you were born is still probably one of the most racist city, right?
I wouldn't say that, but it still has its issues. It has its problems, beyond a doubt of a doubt.
So share with us about the history of rebellion. I mean, you have written about it.
Yes. You know, in Islam, the impetus and the divine mandate to struggle for justice and freedom, not just for Muslims, but for everyone, is very ingrained in this faith. It comes through the book of the Muslims, the Quran. It comes through the prophetic example of our Prophet Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, peace be upon him. And towards that end, in striving to bring about justice and equality in the land, what we as Muslims have found historically and even to today, that during one of the most oppressive, one of the most offensive episodes of human history, and that's the transatlantic trade of enslaved Africans, that what we find historically is that the enslavers, in coming to the shores and the interior and bringing to the shores and then transporting across the Atlantic Ocean, that the most resistance that the enslavers had, they found it amongst the Muslims. They found it amongst the Muslims primarily for just a number of reasons. One is that there's the emphasis in Islam for no one to submit and have a complete total submission other than to the Creator, Allah, the one God. And so this enslavement, this capturing, this stripping one from their family and from their loved ones, and even transporting to foreign lands, being stripped of language and culture and religion, was totally against the dictates of Islam. And so upon reaching the shores in South America, in the Caribbean, and in North America, there was still this mighty resistance coming from the Muslims. As a matter of fact, many of us feel that the ones who were kicked off of these slave ships the first were the Muslims, because of the resistance that the enslavers were getting from the Muslims early on. So we believe, many of us believe, that this is why you see such a high concentration of Muslims in places like in Brazil historically, and it's building back up today. Historically, such a high concentration of the Muslim population because of their resistance against slavery. And then, of course, others enslaved Africans, like my ancestors, were brought into the United States. And upon arriving in the United States, I'll just mention maybe one or two examples. As early as the 1700s, and I think the date was around 1724, if I remember correctly.
About 50 years before the American colonizer started, fighting British.
Yes, there was a major resistance amongst the enslaved Africans in New York City. And the paper at that time and the people, the enslavers, were putting it on who they call Moors. At that particular time in Europe and in the United States, anyone of African descent who professed Islam was just identified as a Moor. This was kind of generic label for folks.
I don't know how it came about, but I think literature, when they're talking about the Spanish Muslim, they also refer to as Moors.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of that had to do with the African Muslims coming into Al-Andalus, the southern part of Spain. And for 600-700 years, an empire, a Muslim empire, was established there. Many of the folks who contributed at different parts of this 800-year history were African Muslims. And so even with Tariq ibn Ziyad, 711, crossing the Strait of Gibraltar and going there, there were many very dark-skinned Muslims who had been requested by the Jewish population in Spain to come and to help stop the suffering and misery that they were suffering under the Visigoths, who were a kind of fanatical group of Christians there in Spain at the time.
So that's where this word Moor they started using.
Yes, yes.
So in New York Rebellion, which is 1727 or something like that, yeah. It is reported they were Moors?
Yes, there were Moors. And they, the public sentiment at that time was to blame these Moors for these enslaved people's rebellion that was going on. I think it was 1723. And to blame these Moors, these African Muslims, for causing these problems, rebelling against slavery. About 30 of these Muslims were identified as being the leaders of this insurrection. And they were summarily hanged and shot and killed.
Don't you think, Brother Khalid, Imam Khalid Griggs, that one of the reasons might be that Muslims who were brought from West Africa were also educated people. They knew their rights, they knew their Quran, they knew that they are born free, and they knew that how Islam's struggle against slavery was. Because one of the book I read, Servants of Allah, talks about the rebellion in Brazil. And it said that these people were more educated than slave owners. And they were giving almost a year worth of wages to get a dictionary, which was written by Christian missionaries in France. So they were importing a dictionary to learn Arabic from the French in Baja in Brazil. So don't you think so that educational background, along with their Islamic teachings, were part of them being, quote unquote, bad slaves who don't want to
Yeah,
play.
absolutely. I mean, that's a very good point. Because the fact of the matter is that even amongst the enslaved population, the Muslims had the highest degree or level of literacy, who were able to read, they were fluent in so many different languages, with Arabic being the uniting language of all of these Muslims, no matter what part of the African continent they came from. If they were Muslim, they had a degree of fluency or familiarity or literacy as far as writing in Arabic. And so they represented, the Muslim enslaved people represented one of the greatest contradictions to the mythology that was used about why these people are enslaved. They were part of this mythology that was pushed during this whole period of over 300 years of the enslavement of Africans in this country, was that these people have basically some of the argument, they have no soul.
Yeah, they are quote unquote savages.
They're savages. They can't read or write. They have no civilization to speak of. But the Muslims who were literate, they knew about their history of glorious Muslim African empires. They knew about those who had brought about these empires. They were able to read in Arabic. Let me give you a story, a brief story about one Omar ibn Said, who happened to be first enslaved in the late 1700s in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, Omar ibn Said actually escaped from Charleston, South Carolina, and made it to Fayetteville, North Carolina. In Fayetteville, North Carolina, because he didn't have a pass saying that he was able to move about the city the way he would want to, he was put into a jail in Fayetteville. And while he was in jail, he started taking coal, charcoal or something that was in this cell and start writing on the walls. And so the enslavers, these people who had imprisoned him, would come and they look and they would laugh at him. Oh, this old man is going crazy. Look, not old man at this time. He was about 25 years old. This man is going crazy. Look at what he's doing. Look at the gibberish he's writing on the wall. So finally, some enlightened white person came and said, well, that's not gibberish. I've seen this kind of writing before. That's actually Arabic. And when they realized what Omar was, they brought someone who could interpret, translate what he was writing on the walls, and they realized it was the opening chapter to the Quran, the Al-Fatiha. So when Omar was released, because of this level of literacy, he was not released to be a free man, but his enslaver was someone who, because he had this level of literacy, and by the way, he was a person who was educated in the Islamic sciences before being captured and brought to the United States. If he were not an imam, minimally, he was an Islamic scholar who had a great degree of knowledge about the Quran. And so this story can be repeated so many different times.
And it is important, Imam Khalid Griggs, to also mention that he wrote sort of a autobiography in Arabic language, and it was lost. People knew that he wrote, but it was lost. And about 15 years ago, it was being auctioned, and my son Bilal Mujahid contacted me that here's this thing being auctioned, Dad, we need to purchase.
Wow.
And I went around looking for money to purchase it, and I couldn't find the money. And I was doing a khutbah, a sermon in Chicago that looked at the Muslim heritage. We couldn't control our Muslim heritage, and somebody purchased it. So after the sermon, somebody stood up in the audience and said, no, Alhamdulillah, a Muslim purchased it.
Alhamdulillah, that's great.
Derek Tariq Beard.
Oh,
and
that's wonderful.
we brought him, and we have exhibit in Chicago DuSable Museum in which his original copy of diary was on display. You're watching Muslim Network TV, and this is Imam Malik Mujahid talking with Imam Khalid Griggs, and we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with Imam Khalid Griggs. And you're watching Muslim Network TV on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as on Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and pretty soon, inshallah, on Apple TV as well. Imam Khalid Griggs, let's make a transition. Right now, there is a movement in the country. And that movement started with the tragic murder of brother George Floyd, and a 17-year-old African American who was equipped with a cell phone to record that. Otherwise, probably it would not happen. Probably 100 times more cases like that happen, and sometimes they get recorded. That movement is strong and moving forward. In the Muslim community, there is a conversation going on, and most of the African American imams and leaders are invited to speak about it, and they're talking about racism in the Muslim community. Now, question which I like to pose to you, and I know that there is racism in the Muslim community. There is no question about it. I'm a personal witness to you, Imam Khalid Griggs, being called a black boy. And there are just 2 times in my entirety of life when I felt so much blood rushing and making me violent. And this was one of those occasions. The other occasion was that somebody insulted Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the very horrible manner in front of me. That time I couldn't resist. But this time I was able to control myself, and it changed the direction of my life. So I'm a personal witness to racism in the community. But focus right now by the Imam is teaching Muslim community to liberate themselves. If there is so much racism in the Muslim community, how come Imam Khalid, you chose this faith? How come Malcolm X chose this faith? How come Muhammad Ali fought and lost so much and gained so much honor in the heart of human beings by fighting against injustice? So how do you see both things?
Yeah, you know, um, I'm not surprised at all that you had this experience of someone calling me black boy. As a matter of fact, I'm sure by Muslims I have been called much worse. It doesn't make it any less hurtful to know that my Muslim brothers would have that kind of feeling towards another Muslim, and that Muslim happened in the story that you related happened to be myself. But I see the current issue right now as almost being a godsend for the Muslim community. I think that, you know, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has said that there's care, that there's good that is in everything. If we look close enough, we'll see the good that comes out. I think 2 events have converged at one time. This is the COVID-19, which has slowed everyone down to the point that we have more time to reflect. We have more time to watch documentaries, listen to webinars, to be educated and informed that we would normally have if the situation in society, American society, had remained the same. And then at the same time, we have, as you mentioned, the murder by this killer cop in Minneapolis who had a long history of abuse and discriminatory actions against people of color and Black people in particular, we have this joker being caught on a telephone camera, a video, and posing on Mr. Floyd's neck as if Mr. Floyd was an animal that he had just hunted down. So he felt so casual about it. He could stick a hand in the pocket and look around. He could listen to the cries and appeals, not only for Mr. Floyd, that you're killing me, and even calling upon his deceased mother, who had been deceased for 2 years, but people standing around saying to this joker that you're killing this man, get off of his neck. And so I think that the outpouring of just not only just dissent, but how disgusted that people are with that singular event, but to understand that this is just one event connected to an entire history, particularly of Black people in this part of the world, in the United States, that it's not just a singular isolated event. It is a part of systemic racism that has infected, that has been a part of police departments since the inception of this nation. As a matter of fact, the model of the of policing in this country has its origin in slave patrols. There were aggressive, almost white individuals who were incapable of having feelings for Black enslaved people, who were paid by plantation owners to go out and capture enslaved Africans. And those
who ran away from the slavery.
Yes, so running away from slavery.
You're saying that police is grounded in that?
Yes, American policing is modeled, and this is a historical fact, on slave patrols. And it's not like the British. And I've heard some law enforcement officers, I've seen them on television and they're talking about the model that we are based on out of the British. No, it's totally different. The model in the United States comes from slave patrols. And these were very brutal people. These were people who were charged with not only recapturing escaped enslaved Africans and African Americans, but they were also charged with protecting the property, which these enslaved people were just part of their property, but protecting their property from harm. So this is why for so many tens and hundreds of years in this country, even in modern times, why there is so much outcry and outrage that expressed by the corporate media, for the most part, not all in the corporate media, but many in the corporate media, and those who may share some feelings and sentiments against people of African descent in this country. This is why you see so much outcry about a building, about a J.C. Penney's, a Wendy's getting burned down. More outcry from that than from the extrajudicial killing, murder of a Black man or Black woman or Black child. That the property that these police are charged, like the slave patrols, to protect, it generates a more of an outcry when they see these properties being harmed than the taking of a life of an innocent person.
That's a good lesson in the history of the policing. I mean, that aspect I think need to be highlighted more. But
yes,
towards racism in the Muslim community, I mean, I personally feel if someone is racist and they feel they're racist, or they are told, I think this is a good time for them to do their compensation by being part of the movement to change the system.
Yep.
But tell me this, while Muslim community has the element of racism by people like you and Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali who accept Islam, what is the power of Islam which despite the problems with the, because Muslims are human being, right? Like everybody else, they will have devilish and satanic impulses as well as angelic and God's guidance. So they are capable of. So what is this tension in which people will still accept Islam? And you were part of a connection with Brother Daryl Hunt. May Allah have mercy on his soul and forgive his shortcomings, give him Jannah. That here's a 19-year-old young person who for 19 years maintained that he's innocent, but the system will not let him out. And while he was there, he accepted Islam at your hand. What is this power?
That's an excellent question, Imam Mujahid. And I want to commend you on your efforts to understand the plight and condition and the social dynamics of this nation as it relates to people of African descent and others in this country. And first and foremost, before I answer your question directly, I think that the more our brothers and sisters take time to understand, not just digest what is presented in civic lessons about the greatness of America and not look at this nation critically. There are good aspects of it, but there are horrible, horrendous, structurally embedded bad aspects.
Genocidal, you must add that, genocidal things.
Yeah, genocide. Genocide is, and so all of this is a part of the history of this country. So if we are to be productive citizens, we have to embrace all of it, not positively embrace genocide and structural racism, but we have to know that it exists. We have to know its origins. We need to know the history of resistance leading up to this. But one of the things I'll say for myself, when I embraced Islam in 1972, I was reading a very small tract written by Maulana Maududi called Towards Understanding Islam. And I was in my senior year at Howard University, and I had just started trying to understand what is this Islam that Malcolm X talked about in his autobiography, It's Told to Alex Haley. I read that when I was in the 9th grade. And from the time of the 9th grade literally up until the time that I embraced Islam in 1972, and maybe just a year before that, I couldn't find anything other than almost like the encyclopedia projection, one of the world's great religions. It didn't give the essence of the faith for me. So I wasn't attracted to that. But when I was reading Towards Understanding Islam, and that if there was a single line in there that really got my attention, and it stated that how Islam was, that we were created to be God's representatives on earth, and to be this vicegerent, to be his representative on earth, that it didn't matter what our socioeconomic background, it didn't matter our color, it didn't matter any of those things. It's anyone who accepts the totality of this faith, which is based, as you said earlier in the opening, is based on justice and establishing just societies. So when I read that, it just immediately erased any false notion or idea, because of the historical development in this country of Black people. It was like a weight lifted off my shoulder. I've been saying, my parents have been telling me nobody better than any other human being, but now I'm seeing in reading about Islam that this is a foundation piece for Islam. And so the more I learned about this faith as a liberating force, not in a nationalistic sense, not making one group of people superior to the other, to any other, but the attraction to me and so many others, like with a Daryl Hunt, like with a Malcolm X, like with a Muhammad Ali and so many others, it is a way of life that is not, and another aspect that appealed to me in studying, it was not the dimension of you ought to be non-violent under every circumstance, that there's no religious justification for you ever to resist, physically resist oppression and repression. And in Islam, I found this as the perfect balance. It's a perfect balance, especially for oppressed people. I think this is why when you look at the early history and that first movement of Islam under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that we find that so many of the early companions of Muhammad were oppressed people. They were enslaved people. They were the people without status in the society. Of course, there were rich individuals as well. And people like Abu Bakr and Uthman, they were able to purchase the freedom of those who had embraced Islam, who were still enslaved. And
yes, Imam Khalid, you're on a very important point, and somewhere I read that about 80,000 slaves were freed by people who are rich. They will purchase them and free. And there are so many categories of zakat, and most of those categories applied to people being freed. You're listening to Imam Khalid Griggs at Malik, and I'm Imam Malik Mujahid, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. We're on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as Roku and Amazon Fire, and we will be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. You're listening to, or you're watching. I'm on Radio Islam is merged into Muslim Network TV, so I'm still used to calling listening to. Yes, you're watching Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and I'm talking with our honorable guest, Imam Khalid Griggs. It was in your masjid, in your mosque in Winston-Salem, that you invited me to speak. I think it was late 2004.
Yes.
And that was the time when images of Abu Ghraib have started coming out. In those images, the Iraqi prisoners, all of them Muslims, were being tortured and photographed by naked male and naked Muslim women. And with explicit sexually explicit positions, and it also included a rape of a Muslim woman by officers, and it was videographed and photographed. So 60 Minutes in 2004 that release broke the story, and in your masjid talking about this, when I mentioned that, there is a young man who stood up. And he said, when I saw those photos, I thought it is the prisons of North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, I came to know that's Daryl Hunt, and I have no idea who Daryl Hunt is. Forgive my ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the person who was in prison for 19 years on false charges, couldn't prove his innocence. And so I have several questions. I mean, you were involved in getting him free in that struggle. And but also I like to learn a little bit about prisons of North Carolina, in which we thought, and later on we learned one of the person who were photographed torturing the pile of naked people in that way was actually a prison guard from North Carolina. So the connection of cruelty at home extended to cruelty abroad, where nobody is watching, no cell phone is there. And Abu Ghraib, we know about it, but there are wars around the world, and we don't know what else go on there. So, so tell me that a little bit about Daryl Hunt. And first thing is, everybody refers to him as Daryl Hunt. He has a Muslim name also. So tell me
Yes,
about your relationship with Daryl Hunt and his struggle and how you were part of that struggle to get him released.
sure. His Muslim name was Muhammad Atiba.
Muhammad Atiba.
Atiba, Atiba.
Okay.
And I would recommend to all of your viewers and your Sound Vision radio audience to go to YouTube and look at this documentary, and it's called The Trials of Daryl Hunt.
Yeah, the trial of Daryl Hunt. Yes.
Yeah, Trials of Daryl Hunt, and it's an excellent depiction of what this young man went through, starting at the age of 19 and enduring for the next 19 years of his young life. Um, what was so extraordinary about this case, one, it wasn't remarkable in the sense that it was an aberration, an anomaly. You know, it was something that happens in courtrooms and in prisons to inmates all around the country every day of the year in the United States. But what we found unusual at that time about Muhammad Atiba's case is that he was charged with the rape and the murder of a white journalist who was a copy editor for, at that time we had two, a morning and an evening paper, for this evening paper called the Winston-Salem Sentinel. And on her way to work one day, early in the morning, about 6 or 6:30 in the morning, she was accosted and she was dragged behind this fence and stabbed up, brutally stabbed, and sexually violated. And Daryl was accused of this particular, he was charged with the crime. And I want to add, Imam Mujahid, when I first met Daryl in the county jail in Winston-Salem, my feelings were cemented that this is a human being who was incapable of committing the brutal crime that he had been charged with at that time. He hadn't been convicted, just charged at this time. It takes a certain kind of deranged or degenerate spirit to do to another human being what this person who assaulted this lady had done to her. And Daryl, I just didn't feel he had that spirit. So what his case went through the trial at the Superior Court level here in Winston-Salem. It went to the appeals court in North Carolina. It went to a federal regional appeal. It went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and the court refused to hear this young man's case and turned it down. And it was so insulting to the average person's intelligence that had it been not so serious, if it weren't so serious, it had to be some kind of dark comedy for these folks to take the scant and no evidence that they had that this man was guilty and to charge him and to convict him, but twice. And then between the second trial on the appeal, between that, he was charged with another murder of a man, an older man in a drink house, said that he took an axe handle and beat this man to death. Now, when this case came up, he was exonerated. It was just too ridiculous, even for a majority white jury in the South to convict him of that murder. But the second time he was charged with the murder of the journalist, he was convicted again. And as I said, it went all the way up the scales. But what happened was very similar to what we're seeing in the George Floyd murder by this killer cop. It was a very galvanizing a series of episodes particularly for the Black community in this city and in this state. In my life, I had never seen so much outcry from the community And consistently over this period of 19 years, there was just this public outcry, very much like we're seeing with George Floyd. What the difference being that I observe now is that it was primarily the African Americans who were coming out against his conviction. It was,
so you're talking about in Winston-Salem, for Daryl Hunt, it was essentially African Americans.
Yeah, it was very, very few white Americans, very few, because he had been tried in the press, he had been tried in the newspaper, tried in the news, and it was a very difficult uphill battle. And so the white community, it started with white ministers who near the end of his period of incarceration got involved. And this was a tremendous help to the efforts that those of us who were a part of this Daryl Hunt Defense Committee, which I was a co-chair for this committee, that it really helped when more than just the African American community was coming out in his support. And that's why, one of the reasons why I'm so encouraged to see today what is going on in these protests around the murder of George Floyd and everyone else who's been murdered recently, is that the white community from the very beginning has joined with the African American community in many of these demonstrations. There are more white folks than black folks in these demonstrations. What I would personally like to see more of are members of the Muslim community in this country, both from the African American Muslim community, but also from the immigrant or new American Muslim community, to take part in demonstrations or to organize demonstrations. Because if we are honest about it, much of the civil rights legislation, if not all of this legislation, that so many African Americans went to jail and prison for, were murdered for, were ostracized for, who were not able to get jobs, who, like Rosa Parks, had to even leave her state, her city of birth and where she lived, to move to Detroit, Michigan, because of the death threats on her life and how she was ostracized by the larger community. So it's good.
So the participation by the broader community, because justice cannot be, if justice cannot be just for one community, then fight for justice cannot be limited, assigned to one community. All of the people must stand up and fight. But are you satisfied that Muslim community is participating in a I would not say, comparing with the past struggles, do you think Muslim community is properly participating?
No, I don't. I think there is so much more that those of us in the Muslim community can do.
A whole lot of webinars and lectures and sermons about it. I mean, when I was there in Chicago, immediately the Saturday after the murder, I could spot only one person other than me.
Yeah. And unfortunately, sadly, that's the case in too many areas. And what I'm getting from telephone calls and emails from a lot of the younger Muslims across the country is that their parents are forbidding them to go outside the house and to have any kind of visible presence at these rallies. Now, we have COVID-19 out here, and I would hope that anyone, Muslim or not, who goes out, that we to the best of our ability, that we practice social distancing, but minimally that we wear a mask and, have our hands washed and do what we can to try to prevent catching this dreaded COVID-19 virus. But
do you consider this is, you have seen many movements, you have been part of Pakistani movement,
Mhm.
including Daryl Hunt's movement, which you thought in Winston-Salem has the same impact, but mostly limited to African American community. Do you
Mhm.
think this movement in some way is uniquely more advanced and stronger than the earlier movement in America?
Yeah, I think what has happened is that through social media, through check Google, people are able to just get
Oh, that may be your sheikh, brother, not mine.
right. But so many people are able to get at least a skeleton framework of the past and certain historical events. And then, you have to read on your own and do independent study. But I think that at this point in American history, more information is available. More books have been written about the history of struggle in this nation and the history of the Black freedom struggle in this country, the Native American struggle in this country. And I think that people, whether they are consciously aware of the specifics of this history, they know from a factual basis now that history actually existed. And I think honestly that people are, as Fannie Lou Hamer famously said, they're sick and tired of being sick and tired.
And tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah, and I think that the callous disregard that this Kevin Chauvin showed for Mr. George Floyd, that callous disregard, I think it struck a nerve in people. It was like, man, this is.
Yeah, I mean, you were right when you're saying he's sitting as though he's sitting on a hunt.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of photos of these British people hunting animals in Africa, and they sit exactly in that pose.
The same pose, man. And that's what struck me when I saw this dude. I mean, it's like he's just captured an animal that's still alive. And now this is a human being begging for his life at no point. And I don't know. It says something about the spirit of George Floyd. All of his friends and relatives say that people call him the gentle giant. He showed why he was the gentle giant. Because even as a Muslim imam practicing Islam as long as I have, I don't think I could have, in such a calm manner, without using profanity or talking about the officer's mother or something, I could not, I don't believe, have the demeanor that Mr. Floyd had in appealing and begging for his life. So it says something. This was not a criminal spirit. This was not a gang banger. This was not someone who took pride in threatening law enforcement or anything like that. He didn't resist. It was just a pathetic snapshot of what Black folks in this country have gone through for over 400 years.
Thank you so much, Imam Khalid Griggs. I truly appreciate you honoring us with your presence and sharing your thoughts with us at the Muslim Network TV. This is Imam Malik Mujahid, and you can always watch Muslim Network TV with exciting conversation like that, full with knowledge, wisdom, and direction. We are always on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku TV, and always on our website, muslimnetwork.tv. And I would like to thank our producer, Zahra Nadeem, for producing today's show, and our intern producer, Sumaya Haider. Thank you so much. Peace.
Thank you.
Salam.